I was like, that's the worst voice I've ever heard.
Totally. I was the same way in drama in like middle school.
Yes.
I was like embarrassed for myself.
Yes,
I was like, oh
I'm
my
like-
God.
You don't have to live with pain or chronic neuro issues any longer. In this podcast, you will learn how to stabilize your brain, body, and biochemistry for the rest of your life. I'm Dr. Teams, and this is the Neuro Reset Podcast.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Dr. Teams. Welcome back to another episode of the Neuro Reset Podcast. Sorry, we've been a little busy lately, so we haven't been rocking out as many podcasts as we would have liked to, but we're going to catch back up on that soon. But I do want to welcome a special guest, Amy here. Long story short, she started in one place, ended up in another, and now she's feeling better. I think we still have a little bit of ways to go, but for the most part, we're like out of the weeds, and it's about strengthening at this point as opposed to like rehabbing really much of anything anymore, right? And so I'm not going to do as much justice as she will sharing her own story, but I'd like everybody to welcome Amy.
Hi.
So, so tell us a little bit about, we kind of prepped a little bit for this, but what brought you in?
What didn't bring me in?
Right.
Is a better question.
And so like, what were you going through that caused you to reach out?
Initially, I had no idea what I was going through, and my kind of gut feeling told me that this was a nervous system, stress, anxiety related thing initially, but because of the sheer volume and intensity of the symptoms that I experienced, I began questioning that. But I was experiencing, I'm sure I'm going to leave out a ton of symptoms, but we'll kind of go head down.
Head to toe.
Head to toe, yeah. It started with vertigo, a 9-hour vertigo episode. And that led to what some people call like 3PD, PPPD, neural circuit dizziness, which does not feel like your standard I'm a little lightheaded sort of dizziness, what I thought were intractable vestibular migraine, ungodly head pressure, tinnitus, food aversion, nausea, vomiting, and food aversion is putting it mildly.
Mm-hmm.
Like weight was falling off of me, body temperature regulation, I was constantly freezing, nerve pain, felt like my body was vibrating, my heart was throwing insane amounts of PVCs, blood pressure all over the place, dropping. I'm probably leaving so much out because there was an insane amount.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
You kind of downplayed like that anxious piece too. And,
nonstop.
Yeah. And you had sleep issues,
Yep.
right?
Severe
gosh.
insomnia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like I was having some people I had a panic attack or an adrenaline dump or something and it lasted 10 minutes. I felt like I was living perpetually in that space where I would have bouts of sinus tachycardia where my heart was 100 to 200 beats per minute, sustained for hours, sometimes days on end. Yeah.
And you had times where you would end up in the ER, right?
Many times.
So what did they do for you?
Initially, the first few times they would just give me a benzo and send me home.
For those that are listening, benzos are typically more for that anxiety piece
Yep.
of it, right? Mm-hmm. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yes. Did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Third and fourth time, they really started wanting to rule out anything imminently dangerous. And a lot of the testing that I had done, I had tilt table testing, I had testing for positional vertigo, I had blood tests, I had CT scans, MRIs with and without contrast, I had a lumbar puncture. They scanned me from thighs to head, and they were nothing imminently dangerous is happening.
So you're not dying.
Yes, you're
but
not
you feel
dying.
like you're dying.
But you feel like you're dying.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they were like, we don't know what's going on. It seemed like every specialist that I saw had a different diagnosis kind of based on their area of expertise. So I got Ehlers-Danlos, I got POTS, I got potential Lyme disease, I got dysautonomia, I got some just random strange, undiagnosed autoimmune disease.
They didn't have a name for it. They just said it has to be autoimmune.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so, what's interesting in the world of healthcare is all those can be true.
Right.
But the one thing that all of those have in common is the nervous system.
Yep.
Which is interesting. It's one of those. The nervous system is one of those things where it's very simple to understand. Like, yeah, it's a fight or flight. That's what most people understand, but they don't understand what causes it, right? And so it can creep up on you for so many years, and then all of a sudden it takes one little thing that completely sets your system off that it now can't recover from. Yeah. Right. And so that is like, you have one of those stories that is in many cases, it's very typical because things become normalized. Right. And so I'm really curious to dive into that. Like, after some of these conversations that we really, I think it seemed to happen more like right before you kind of reported like hitting rock bottom, is we were having some of these conversations like, here's why this is happening.
Yeah.
And then on the way out of this whole thing, as you're recovering from it, you're like, well, then I'm thinking about this too, right? All the stuff that can contribute to it.
Yes.
And so, we have a little bit of a saying here that it's like, everything is stress until proven otherwise. Mm-hmm. In one way, shape, or form. It can come from trauma. It can come from lack of sleep. Where does the lack of sleep come from? Usually some kind of stressor. It can be a work thing, a relationship thing, a head injury thing, a food thing, an environmental thing like mold or Lyme or whatever, like, an infection thing. It can just be, I hate saying it, but like negative self-talk things. And it can be all of those things at the same time. So we like have to look at each one of the components to see which one it really is. Yeah. And if it's all of them, we have to address all of them.
Or which ones, yeah.
Right, exactly.
In my case.
And so what was something that we ended up either covering or doing to help shed light on why this happened in the first place? What was like I don't want to say like the come to Jesus moment, but like when it started making sense, like and putting it all together.
And I talked about that frequently with like friends and family members. Like, I feel really grateful that I wound up here first, because I could have wound up a lot of other places, mm-hmm. and I could have gotten just stuck in that perpetual spiral of like fixing, Googling, trying this, trying that, like all the bandages without getting to the root of the issue, which is the nervous system, 100%. But I would say in my personal experience, the thing that really first stuck with me was hearing someone that has more expertise and more knowledge than me say something so much more confidently than all of the other specialists and doctors that I had talked to, that were like, well, I think it's this, and you were like, I know why this is happening. And you're going to feel bad until you no longer feel bad, but that's not what you said.
And also we could say it, right?
Okay.
And so, and honestly, it's one of those things, because like you have a little bit of a potty mouth too, which is great, but it works, right? So what she's talking about is, at one point I made the comment to her, I'm like, listen, and because during these times of, I might feel a little bit better, or, hey, we've been doing this for weeks now, why am I not better, right? You get frustrated, and it's like, listen, you're going to feel like shit until you don't feel like shit anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So there's like a point where that needle moves towards the healing side, where you're like, oh, that's what like healing feels like. Right. And we just weren't there yet. And, and so there is a timeline that takes people from feeling like they're in the pit of misery and, doing the Googling, and I hate to say it, but like those pity parties, right?
No, for real.
And all of that has like kind of has to play its course. Mm-hmm. For you to come to the realization that, okay, I got to do something different.
Yeah.
Right. And you just, since like from the day that you had that moment and then you shared it with me, like literally every day has like been better and better and better and better. And so it's really cool. I am very excited to hear your journey kind of summed up in this podcast for people that are also going through this, or are like on the verge of getting ready to go through this, mm-hmm. because of the same thing that you went through, of the stress, of the long work hours, of the being in control, and like, okay, I'm losing, like my brain's telling me something's not right, but I'm going to keep going. Like that stuff is what I feel so many people need to hear. And then what happened between not being able to heal, then all of a sudden you could start healing? Like, what was the difference, right?
Yeah.
And so I would love for you to touch on some of that if you could. This is going to be mostly a you thing today.
Okay.
I'm only going to ask questions if I feel things are like left out or anything. But I mean, you have just such a cool story. I want to hear like the cliff notes of like what was going on 20 years prior to this, right? So like, where did this start?
Yeah. And it's funny because part of my problem initially was trying to figure out where it started, but that's because I was trying to solve it.
Right.
You know, and I was like, if I can go back and I can find that exact moment, was it this medication? Was it bioidentical hormone replacement therapy? And I was looking for all these little things until I realized, A, it doesn't matter because here's where I am and here's what my symptoms are and here's what we know is causing them. But B, it was 1,000 things. It was 1,000 things. And obviously people that grow up in really supportive, healthy environments and have, you know, happy, calm lives and good boundaries, like people can still experience anxiety and stress.
Sure.
And it all comes down to your reaction and your response to it. But I don't think that there's, you know, any secret in that people who experience certain things are probably at a much higher risk of experiencing something like this. So I had a lot of stress right from the get-go of my life, really. I grew up in a very chaotic, dysfunctional home life, very inconsistent. And you just never really knew what to expect. Yeah. And so fight or flight was something that my body was very familiar with from a very young age. Right.
And so I'm gonna kind of like dive in with little comments. And you know, we're designed to grow up in a safe environment. There's a difference between like walking on eggshells and like not feeling safe. Right? It's like every day might be a little off, or like there can be good days and bad days, but like you remember the bad ones. Mm-hmm. Then there's like real toxic stuff that happens every single day, day in, day out. And then like people become like the parents at the age of 8. You know, they have to take care of their brothers and sisters. Like there's a whole wide array of like what this trauma can look like. But definitely it's elevated when you're not in a safe environment. And that like almost primes the sympathetic system to be more active than not. Kind of like a soldier, like a child soldier.
Yeah, and it taught me that problem solving, reading the vibes, reading a room, predicting things was going to keep me safe, physically safe.
Or survive, right?
Yeah, literally. It was a survival thing in my upbringing, I think. And that behavior, because it serves you initially, it eventually becomes a compulsion, and you just carry it with you into the rest of your life. And then it gets reinforced when you have more and more scenarios that come up, and that is your comfort zone.
Right.
Your comfort zone is problem solving.
Hey, Amy, I've got this problem with this project. Can you help me solve it? Absolutely.
Yep.
I'll do it myself.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so it's like you're just so used to fending for yourself that it becomes that behavior that you just reenact because that's what you know. It's like a habit.
Yep.
Right? And so, or a pattern is another way to say it.
Yeah.
And so how did that play out like as the years went on?
I mean, honestly, it would seep into every aspect of my life, to the point that people would crack jokes like, "Oh, don't go in the kitchen when mom's in the kitchen," you know, and like funny things like that, which I know, you know, women in general, we can crack jokes like that, or, you know, men if you're super into cooking, or, you know, but at the same time, like, it was a maladaptive behavior for me. It was like my comfort came from perceived control. And initially I was like, okay, I'm controlling things as they're happening, but it's like an addiction. And then that's not enough. You still have anxiety, you still have all of these like unproductive, intrusive thoughts, and you ruminate on them. And so now you move into the realm of trying to control things that have not happened yet. And so now you're making predictions, and now you're gathering information, and like
the what if scenarios, and how am I going to solve this if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, right? They say the future thought of something or the future worry, I guess you could call it, is the anxiety aspect of things,
100%.
right? So if this doesn't happen, am I still going to be in control, right? How am I going to control that situation? And you don't always think about it as how am I in control? People justify it by saying like, okay, how can I solve this problem?
Yeah.
Right. It's like you change the word solve and control, like in a way that's kind of the same thing.
Yep.
And so but it's also like a superpower. But
it was for a while.
Right. It's like, it's a superpower until it goes unchecked. Then it becomes the villain.
Yeah. Right.
Like a superhero.
Yeah.
Like this is how the villain story started, right?
Yep.
They always there's a lot of that going around the internet right now.
Mm-hmm.
So as that goes through and kind of falls into every piece of life, as you're saying. So and again, you can share whatever you'd like to share.
Mm-hmm.
Where did it become obvious to you that something wasn't right? And like, what was the scenario playing out, and how long was that going on when you realized they connected?
Looking back, there's a lot of hindsight now, I can see that like my body was throwing me red flags, I would say, intermittently over the years, especially starting in like 2018, right? Again in 2020. And I think that I became really good at just increasing my tolerance for discomfort and continuing to go and to go and to go. And looking back at some of those instances where I remember in 2018, I started having a ton of PVCs with my heart again. My blood pressure was all over. My cardiologist, because I did have heart surgeries when I was younger, so like I had a little bit more reason than your average person to pay attention to that stuff, but I still had a gut feeling it was stress related. I started having weird breathing instances, and then I would be like, it's stress, it's whatever, it's fine, everyone has stress, and it would go away, because I think part of what helped it go away initially, with hindsight, looking back, knowing what I know now, is that I wasn't fearful and resistant of it. It wasn't until all of this hit me at once and doctors were saying like, it's, all these other things, but also I was getting, it's just anxiety. And I was like, there's no way I could buy that in the past when it was 1 or 2 symptoms, but when it's everything and I'm losing 40 pounds in 2 months and I can't walk and my muscles are giving out on me and I can't write my name without shaking, I'm like, just anxiety does not carry the gravity of how you feel. That's why I think so many people feel gaslit when somebody says something like that. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what's interesting too is like the similar pathways, right? We talk about pathways and integration of those pathways and things with the office and rehab and all of that. And like anxiety is like kind of that, it's both a physical and a mental representation of these pathways that go haywire or go uncontrolled.
Yeah.
Right. And it's obviously they kind of go hand in hand with that fight or flight system. So what kind of things were you experiencing for like how long? Like how long were you doing like the work stuff and solving these problems and going and living out that pattern that worked until it didn't? Like how long was that going on?
Oh God.
How long were you problem solving until you couldn't problem solve anymore?
Like 35, 40 years, honestly. And I think it got even reinforced when my daughter was in the hospital and she was premature. And so she was in the hospital for 6 months and had 9 operations. And this was in 2004. And, the internet was newer back then. And she was at Children's Hospital in West Michigan, and it was a fantastic children's hospital. Some of the best neonatologists in the world were there. But she had a very rare combination of prematurity and birth defects. And I would spend hours poring over the internet, reading medical journals, reading studies. And I wound up actually finding a case study in Saudi Arabia that was an almost exact replica of her, and I printed it out and I gave it to her doctors, and they used that as the blueprint for an operation that saved her life initially. And she did pass after 6 months, which was awful. My body was stuck in fight or flight for that whole 6 months, but I felt like I was almost like even more motivated to problem solve at that point in time. And then because I was like essentially rewarded for it by finding things that were game changers and did prolong her life, it kind of reinforced that habit. And then when she passed away, I actually felt like I hadn't problem solved enough, and I hadn't dug enough, and I hadn't done enough. And I kind of started to now apply that feeling of loss to just everything moving forward. And so it became, I think, an even more ingrained
like purpose, right?
Yeah, part of my, and it felt like there was more at stake after that, because you're like, holy cow, what if I had found even more? What if, because she was never diagnosed as terminal or not terminal. It was just like, let's take it one day at a time. And then I would look back and it was what if, and oh, I didn't advocate enough at this point in time, or when I did, it was too late. And, so that reinforced it. And it just like, I became super concerned with something happening to my kids. And then as my kids got older, I became super concerned with something happening to me, not because I was afraid of something happening to me, but like, I can't be there to advocate for my kids. So now I start trying to control everything about my life and my health. And it's like, I saw every day as like a challenge to like make as much progress with like parenting and finances and my job, and like felt like the clock was constantly ticking, and so I just had this massive pressure on myself. And
like it's never enough.
Yeah. And because I was really good at solving problems, people just come to you with your problems. And then when you don't have good boundaries, you're like, sure,
right,
let me do that.
Right.
Let me do this.
You did share about your photography stuff, and I don't think we've ever covered that until just today.
Yeah.
It was very, very unique, very interesting to hear your reflection on it. And so if you're open to sharing that, I think it would be like super cool, that experience with the photography and basically the PEDS department.
Yeah.
If you're okay with it. If not, that's
sure.
totally cool.
No, sure. After my daughter passed away, I realized because I was stuck in that fight or flight mode and I was in survival mode, like amped up times 10 for, 6 months, she passed away, and I only had one grainy photo of me holding her of that whole time. And I was just like devastated by that. And I started thinking, gosh, there's other families that are probably going through the same thing, and they're not thinking of something. It seems so trivial, like a photo, when your child is fighting for their life. But if they don't make it, or even if they do, looking back, like that's a really precious thing. And so another photographer in West Michigan, myself, actually I think there were like 3 or 4 of us total, we had gotten together and started doing infant bereavement photography. And we worked with the NICU primarily, and also the maternity ward too. So we would be on call, and sometimes you'd get a call at 1 or 2 in the morning, and it was like an hour away. So I'd like get up, drive to the hospital, bring my gear. And sometimes you'd get there and the baby would have already passed. But oftentimes I would get there and the baby had not passed yet and was in the process of, passing and with their family. And so I would take those photos, and it felt really cathartic for me at first, until it didn't, I guess. And, like I told you, I had a really hard time with boundaries and saying no, because I felt like, gosh, there are not a lot of people that are equipped to do this work. And because I am equipped to do it and I've been through it, I have like an obligation to keep doing this. And, it just being in the room when a child passes is incredibly heavy. And then being with their parents. And then often I would be asked to attend the funeral because their family would feel like I was one of the few people that got to witness their baby's short life, especially if they had passed shortly after birth. And so I was going to funerals for children regularly after my daughter died, and I was sitting with these families, and it was a gift that I was able to do it, and I'm grateful for it, but I didn't have the capacity to say no or to stop when I should have. Like, I just kept pushing through because I felt that sense of obligation.
Right.
So that really caused some burnout, and it eventually led to me stopping from photographing children at all in any capacity, healthy or otherwise. And then that led to me, like, I couldn't even photograph families. And then eventually I just did like weddings and commercial. And then finally, after 20 years, I was just like, I can't even handle this anymore. Like, I just couldn't even handle it.
It's all like tied together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. So then, thanks for sharing that. I know that was heavy, but thank you. And so then the transition from photography to other problem solving, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
So what was next?
So I had like a brief stint in marketing, and then a good friend of mine has worked in human trafficking prevention for years here in Arizona, very, very successfully. She's done a lot of great things, and she and I started working together, wrote this like Hail Mary grant, which was another just like, and she is a very similar personality type to mine, actually. And so like what we didn't know actually probably worked out in our favor when we wrote our first grant to fund a nonprofit that had been created by a group of individuals here in the Valley, and they didn't really have any funding. So she and I wrote this huge federal grant. We'd never written one on our own before. We just like dove in. We're like watching YouTube videos, and
Solving a problem.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, solving a problem. And we basically didn't sleep for like 2 weeks and wrote this huge federal grant, and we were one of 6 people that received it.
Wow.
And we were like, I mean, we were just as blown away as anyone else that we received it. We just thought it was like going to be this huge learning experience. And so even though we wanted the grant, we didn't really anticipate getting it. And so that was just an explosion of baptism by fire, learning how to navigate the federal grant system, and going from having a nonprofit that had almost no funding to like ample funding, or at least at that time. We talked earlier, but yeah, that was pretty crazy too. Very, very high stress for both of us in those early phases when that happened. And she was a little more well-versed in it than I was, but it was just, and then of course it's the type of work that you're doing, because now we're writing curriculums and programming that revolves around working with individuals who've experienced abuse and exploitation and trafficking. And that can be really triggering if you've had the type of upbringing and experience that I had.
Right.
And so, yeah,
So
it's been a lot.
So, that's the thing with just that nervous system, right? The nervous system is very much a reflection of the stuff you've been through, right? It's almost like every little thing that happens just adds to the scale, like adds to the weight of it, right? Other things can be really heavy, like the size of an elephant. Other things are just like the size of a feather, but they're still like, they start adding up, right?
Yeah.
So like, I kind of have a question. We've never talked about this before, but your partner in this, did their system fall apart?
She went through a lot of, I would say, very tough things emotionally. Definitely had some physical symptoms that I think pertain to her trauma massively. I think that she was lucky. She and I have talked about this before, and I know that she would be fine with me discussing this. So she said that she was very lucky in that initially when she started getting into trafficking prevention, she was able to receive like some types of like EMDR, brain spotting, different types of therapeutic modalities that she's like, were not even in the realm of my budget, but because of what I had been through and the work I did was offered to me at no charge. And she said, I think that really did help me, but I just saw her the other day and she's like, this has absolutely changed me on a cellular level. You know, it does. It just does.
Yeah. And so, I was wondering because I wrote like some guides and some things online where it's like you take one person who grows up in that safe household versus one that has that like nervous system activating household, and then they both go through life. Where do they end up?
Right.
And so I was curious to see if there was like anything on her end that would have been like, oh no, she's totally fine. Right. But why did your system break down like it did? Right. And so that's kind of what I was going for, but it wasn't there. So,
yeah.
But, at the same time, people tend to get into things for a good reason.
Yeah. And
so it doesn't surprise me at all that you guys have kind of a similar story as well.
Yeah.
So, okay. So thank you again for sharing that. For you guys listening or watching, you start to pick up on that level of nervous system activation, right? When I generally say that, I'm mainly talking about the sympathetic nervous system, just a sympathetic system. And so every little piece matters, right? And that's what a lot of people don't end up sharing in like the new patient evaluation or a consultation. I always ask, is there any trauma? Or if it's like a POTS case, I'm like, where was the trauma? Like, tell me where it was, what it was, so I can understand it, because 9 times out of 10, there's going to be trauma, which is why it allows that system to get so dysregulated. There's almost always trauma present. Like a head injury is different. That just disrupts like the pathways and the integration, like in a moment, whether there was trauma or not. Right. It's like, how long does it take to heal from it is kind of based on how much trauma was present in a way.
And I did actually have a traumatic head injury as a child as well. I had a severe concussion and skull fracture when I was little. So I've got it all.
Throw another one on there, right?
I have it all.
And so then we got together and you were like, I mean, I know that when we met, you weren't in great shape. And then it actually kind of was still going downhill and we were trying to turn it around. So if you could, let's see how much time we got. We probably got like another up to 20, 30 minutes maybe.
Okay.
And so I'd be really interested to hear and to have you share that piece of it, right? Like what drew you here? What did we do that was different than some of your other docs that they did? And then like kind of what was some of the stuff that we did to help? And then how did things like play out when it started to all flip for you?
Okay. Yeah. Well, what drew me here initially, like intrinsically, was just desperation and problem solving. And then why I chose you guys was just Google search and like reviews and like YouTube comments. And it wasn't just Google review, even though the Google reviews were like fantastic. It was just like, once I saw the Google reviews and some of the YouTube comments, then I searched you guys a little further and just found comments here and there and on Reddit and whatnot. And people were like, go here, go here, go here.
Okay, cool. So we're on Reddit. Yes.
Yeah. And that's where we're all going when we're.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay. So that's what got you here.
Yes.
Then let's talk. What did we do that was different because you've been to how many docs before this?
I don't even know.
Like how long was this going on, like really going on before we met?
Well, so it had started mildly in March of last year, and it was all over the board. And then on October 9, it went crazy. And so I had already been, kind of diet struggling for like 5-6 months.
Sure.
And then October 9 is when I had that like 9-hour vertigo attack. And that was just like the thing that just like kicked off, everything. And
it's like that straw that broke the camel's back.
It was. I think because, I'm actually very proud of myself looking back. Who doesn't go to the ER when you have 9 hours of vertigo?
Right.
And it took me 9 days to go to the ER.
Right.
And I was vomiting and I was a mess. And I was just like, it's vertigo. It's okay.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't think I had health anxiety. I've actually always been kind of cavalier about my health, if anything. But once all the other symptoms started piling on, I think as a result of my like massive fear and resistance of that initial vertigo attack, then my body just spiraled and it went crazy. So then I came in to you guys after about like a solid month and at least 3 to 4 ER trips, one of them to Mayo. I was there for like a day and a half, in ER for like a day and a half. And to their credit, they gave me medical clearance pretty quickly because they ran like every test under the sun. And then they were repeated again. You know, I told you that at another hospital. And then I wound up being admitted right after I found you guys for 8 days because of secondary symptoms, because of just how terribly malnourished and dehydrated I was. So, but when I found you guys and I came in, I just remember the confidence piece, and I will clarify there's a difference between arrogance and confidence. And you were like, just confident. I know why this is happening. And you could even like tell me what some of my symptoms were. I didn't have to rattle them all off. You were like, you're probably feeling this and this and this. Whereas all the other doctors kind of looked at me and questioned the validity of what I was even saying. Right. I was like, okay.
Like that shouldn't happen.
Yes.
No, I get it. I totally get that.
And so I was like, no, okay. He actually, and just the fact that you knew what my symptoms were and they didn't seem strange, quote unquote, was a little bit more comforting. But I still wasn't ready to like give up the fight. Right. As far as like buying in 100%. So
totally, you know, being that problem solver.
Yes.
It's like, how much time did you spend on Google trying to figure it out? Right. So like, you're almost like board certified by the time you come in.
Yeah.
And so, and you're not the only one that does that, right? So many people, because they experience what they experience, like all of these doctors are great at what they do in their specialty.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it takes like the neurologist and the cardiologist, like specialties to come together to help explain what's going on. And it takes 6 months to get in to see each one. So there's such a disconnect for you and the docs because it's hard for them to talk because they're so busy.
Yeah.
It's like we've had to learn not only from the science, the textbooks, the experience, just like our patients teach us a lot. Like, here's what textbook looks like, and you almost never see textbook.
Yeah.
Like what we rattle off in terms of the symptoms is like, this is what we see all the time. Do you have these? You're like, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you have this and this? You're like, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's what is going on with that, and here's why. Does that make sense? It's like, yes, like that's what I've been looking for. I just haven't been able to tie it together.
Right.
So, so we were able to kind of be on the same page there, right?
Yeah.
And so,
and
with confidence, not arrogance.
Yes. And compassion. Definitely compassion. Huge. Everybody here, even other patients. You know, I told you about the woman that was in the waiting room when I was like on one of my worst days, and she was like, I was just admiring her put togetherness. And I don't think I even realized I was kind of like probably ogling, you know, and
just like dumping everything. Yeah.
Just like wrapped in my quilt.
You know, but that's what's cool that's what I love about our office is that happens naturally, like a couple times a month.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I believe everything happens for a reason, right? Like you happen to find us for a reason. You happen to be sitting next to that patient for a reason.
Yeah.
Like it's all part of your journey. And so, sorry, I kind of digress. So, so your system was going haywire. We met like November.
Beginning of November.
Yep. Last year, 24.
Yep.
And it was a rough, like probably the first like 30 days or 45 days was like rough.
Yeah.
And to the point where I'm like starting to check my confidence level, like in all honesty, right? Yeah. But it's like, it doesn't make sense because everything else is testing normal. So it has to be functional related.
Yeah.
And so like how bad? And so that's where we start diving in. We got your family involved. It's like, listen, we're coming together. We're not going to let this fail.
Yeah.
Right. And then I know that there was a time where I don't want to say, I like to say I had a talking to, and it was like, you are the patient. You have to be the patient. Let me be the doctor.
Talkings too.
Right. And,
I needed them.
And so, and that happens, right? You guys that are such problem solvers tend to try to take things over. just out of habit, right? And you're like, well, I was researching this. I'm like, stop it. Like, you're going to drive yourself literally crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, in a way, you almost did.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like sleep issues come along.
Not in a
with
way.
this. And so, you know, and that's the first time that I'd heard what you shared. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know the verbatim, but, you know, when we got to the point, and I think it was about, when did you start feeling or seeing some changes?
So it was the end of December. So I remember, and not that every patient should expect this, but you replied to me on Christmas Day, and I was like close to rock bottom, if not rock bottom then. I wasn't sleeping. I was only getting maybe 30 minutes to 2 hours of that like hyper sleep, you know, where
like
you're
a light nap.
Yeah, where you're not even sure if you've slept. Yeah, maybe 30 minutes to 2 hours a night maximum for like weeks on end. I couldn't eat. I was just, and I wasn't even having the adrenaline dump panic stuff anymore because my body was so
It was like out of it.
depleted. But yet I couldn't sleep because that hyperarousal level was there, but the energy didn't match it. And so I just felt like this zombified shell. And it was like right after that, you had said, I think you had talked to Craig, you had talked to me, you had talked to my mom, and you're like, I can give you tools, but tools are only going to get you so far. And there is a mindset piece and a response and behavioral piece that like has to happen. And I just felt like it felt impossible to me at that point in time because I couldn't see a reality where my symptoms didn't get worse to the point that like my quality of life or life was just gone.
Right.
And so I told you, like, I hit rock bottom and I was like Googling medically assisted end of life stuff. And I had been to the ER and I pleaded with them to admit me to the psych ward because I couldn't sleep. And after like 2 weeks of almost no sleep, they were like, we can't because you're communicating at too high of a cognitive level.
Right.
And I'm like,
I mean, talk about feeling crazy.
Yes.
Like even the psych ward wouldn't take you, right?
Yes.
I mean, and by the way, for anybody listening, she never told me that part until later.
Yeah.
Most people keep that pretty close to the vest, and
Yeah.
I thank God that you didn't,
Yeah.
because like you're like doing so good now.
Yeah.
Certainly comparatively, right? Like, and so keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but that day, I was sitting on my bed. I hadn't slept. You had sent me that email on Christmas and I had read it and I was like, Googling very dark things. And I had a wave of a symptom. I didn't even remember what one it was. I think like my nerves in my feet just started burning. That was a really bad one. And they just felt like they were on fire. And I just got so irritated. And so I started Googling small fiber neuropathy. And I paused and I realized I don't think I want to end my life because I wouldn't care about this symptom if I really wanted to end my life. It was like this kind of like just snapped me back to life for a second. Mm-hmm. And I was like, people that don't want to be here don't Google their symptoms. And so I realized it's not that I don't want to be here. I just don't want to feel this way anymore. And that was when I decided to start Googling essentially the art of learning to feel like shit when you had said, and I remembered you'd said that and I thought about it, literally thought about it right then. Like, you're going to feel like shit until you don't. And I was like, okay, I need to learn how to be okay with feeling like this. And that's when I found Claire Week's book, Hope and Help for Your Nerves, which is so strangely in alignment with what you guys do here. And, you know, she really teaches acceptance and not, you know, resisting your symptoms and all of that
like,
good stuff.
Just to touch on that, it's like if you get pissed off every time you get a symptom, how, like, what does that do for healing?
Yep.
Right? It just drives that fight or flight
It
more,
does.
right? And so at least, you know, if you can't beat them, join them in another way, right? It's like, okay, well, I just won't get pissed off. okay, well, wow, that's actually not as bad. Like,
Yeah.
we're not saying you don't feel bad,
Yeah,
right?
you don't have to like your
Yeah,
symptoms.
it's like, and there can still be things wrong.
Yes.
But if like, it's just like it's like that bad guy on your shoulder, right? It'd just be like, oh, this sucks, doesn't it? And you're like, yes, it does. And then it just spins you out of control.
Yes.
And so, like, I'm glad you found that too. That's just awesome.
It's tolerance tempered with self-compassion. And people that have personality types like mine are probably horrible at self-compassion. I don't want to go back to like 2 weeks before. You had told me to draw the circle on my mirror, and you were like, you can write "I love you" around it. And I was like, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I won't, because that's dumb. And you were like, okay, so just draw the circle. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And so I drew the circle. It is still on my mirror to this day. And I started a gratitude list, 3 things I was grateful for that day. And instead of saying I love you or I like you even to myself, I was like, okay, at least I can write down 3 things that I'm proud of myself for doing. So let's start there. And so that's where I started. And then Craig, my partner, he was like, I want you to read it to me like every day. And it became like a little thing. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to tell you, 3 things that I'm grateful for. And it sounds so cliche. It sounds so Pinterest, but like it really helps. And it's kind of that gateway drug into like self-compassion and self-love.
Mm-hmm.
And, you had also said, start talking to yourself and treating yourself the way that you do your kids and your partner and your friends. And
like, what would you say? If your best friend was going through this, what would you tell them?
yes.
The first thing, everybody's like, listen, just breathe.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, don't say that about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, you're great. Right.
Yeah.
So, and the tricky part is like that best friend is actually you.
Yeah.
And it's very effective.
It is. And I got to that point. So you had told me that like 2 weeks prior, I think, 2, maybe 3 weeks prior. Mm-hmm. And probably on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
I know we had that conversation on more than one day. But I got to that point when I was like at rock bottom, and I was like, I don't know where to start other than to like put down the shield and the sword. Like, really, that's it. That was the first place that I could start, that I had the energy. And I remember, I hadn't slept in ages, but I came in the next day, still had hardly slept, but I was just like weirdly okay with it that day. And I think you might have been gone, actually. I think Rachel was here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Anyway, and I came in and I was just like,
I think I was gone.
yeah. And then she was like, did you get good sleep last night? And I was like, no, I didn't. And she was like, okay, because like you seem, dare I say, a little better,
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't know. I'm trying to like be less fearful and resistant of these symptoms. And I'm not Googling. I was like, okay, if Dr. Teams is telling you to stop freaking Googling and stop reading all of these NHI reports and medical journals. And I remember you were like, you're just smart enough to be dangerous to yourself.
Oh, yeah. All you guys are the same personality, right? You guys all have this IQ, this solution-oriented mindset. It's great, but it's like you become the doctor. And I'm like, you can't be the doctor if you're the patient.
Yeah.
Like, very few people out there are able to accomplish that. A couple do here and there, right? But it's really hard.
It is, because it's tempered with all of this discomfort and emotion.
And a lot of it's just reflex. You're just running on reflexes, right? And so it's not going to, if nothing, it's crazy because the one thing that you're really good at is the one thing that drives you deeper into the ground.
100%.
And it's so hard to understand it when you're in it. And it's like the last thing you want to hear.
Yep.
It's like telling you it's all in your head, right? It's like it's kind of along the same line. So it's a very difficult conversation to have unless unless you're the personality that can hear it.
Yeah.
Right? And you are. It just took a little bit of
did.
time to like grow into it, Like we planted the seed and like, okay, she's got all the tools. Like, when's it going to happen? And then there's an aha moment in every case. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I was gone when yours happened, right? But I remember the week after I came back, and I was like, how's she doing? And it was a specific question about you. It was the first one I asked. And they're like, actually, she's doing a little better. She was like walking around the neighborhood, and the neighbors were making comments. You look so good, right? And I was like, oh. And I thought they were talking about a different patient with the same first name. And they're like, no, it's this one. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's amazing.
Right.
Like, thank God. It's like my weight was lifted off like my heart, because it's like, what else can I do? Because I go into that same solution mindset is what else can I do to help this person? Yeah. And so thank you for doing it then. I don't know how much I had left, but I mean that like, facetiously, but it's like we will, certain cases we take home with us, and it's hard. And I'm finding out all stuff about myself, going and taking care of my own things and doing the things that I preach. I finally get around to it. And, I'm like, oh, so I'm like a little too tied into my patients here. Not mostly because I don't stop thinking about what I can do to help. And it's not conducive to my own life and outside these walls, right? So it's a little tough. So I'm finding balance in that. But I think it's gotten me to a point where it's very successful. But if I kept doing that, other things would break.
Yeah, it's the whole sustainability factor.
Right. And so it is kind of interesting as I'm going through my learning journey on myself. I've hit 40 this year, so I'm doing a lot more reflection. I'm not so different from you guys that burn yourselves out. Right. I was just lucky enough that my dad, many years ago, he's like, don't do what I did and burn yourself out. So like, we work 4 days a week for that reason. Like, these days can be very heavy. Yeah. And a lot of times, like, I don't usually stop working. If something comes in, I'm the first one to look at it, first one to respond, first one to tell somebody else, don't let me respond to this. Like, this one can wait till Monday. It's something like that. But it's almost always there. Just in the last 2 weeks, literally the last 2 weeks, I've been making changes for myself. So,
well, selfishly, I'm glad I found you before your boundaries.
Right. But at least, 9 to 5, Monday through Thursday, you're all, it's like, I'm all yours, right? Yep. But it's like there will be those times when it's necessary, because yours maybe was time dependent. So I'm glad I did. Yeah. I had no idea at the time you were Googling that. Yeah. That could have been the only thing that kept it. I don't know. But
and your response was actually very different than what I expected. And this is looking back. I wonder if I was maybe like, let's see, because I was just so at the end of my rope. And I really thought that your response was going to be like, well, it's too bad that you feel that way, and I wish you well, and da-da-da-da-da. And it was a very understanding and compassionate and helpful and concerned reply. And I was like, all right.
Can't meet them, join them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah.
So, so where are you now? Right. I know we're kind of jumping around, and so I started seeing you in November. By Christmas time, you were hitting like rock bottom. And where would you consider yourself now? Like, this is middle of April compared to 3 months ago.
I feel like, one thing that I've learned, I think, from you guys and from you and from Dr. Rachel and like everybody here, but particularly you two and the conversations I've had with both of you, is it's like, yes, you want to track your recovery by physical symptoms, but you really can't. It's really the mindset piece and the quality of life piece. And then the natural byproduct of that is that the symptoms start going away. And so it's more like I'm measuring by just my quality of life, essentially.
Right. So if I were to translate that, would it be like you can tolerate more? Like you can do more stuff in the sense that, where just getting up out of bed was rough. Taking a very short walk around the neighborhood or something was like is that what you're describing?
A little bit of both. I think that I have some symptoms that are completely gone. I don't think will ever be back again. I was barely eating 400 calories a day back then. My appetite has fully returned. The like intractable vestibular migraine feeling sensations that I had, I would say those are like 80% gone. The nerve pain, 80-90% gone. The PVCs have massively reduced, and they're continuing to. I feel like I'm in the midst of recovery, but I also feel like my quality of life now versus just in January is almost incomparable. Like, it's almost incomparable. And it's so crazy how quickly our brains are able to heal, and the resiliency factor and the way that it, like, some of the protective things our brains do is like great. I experienced some of the worst lows of my entire life, I would say, in December of 2024. And I already have a hard time recalling some of that month, because where I was previously existing in that space of negativity bias, my brain only wanted to go back and get confirmation that things were terrible. And now my brain is shifting into more of a healthy positivity bias, or a hopeful bias.
Right.
So
It's like, almost like a misery loves company.
Yeah.
Like, I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And I see it a lot too. And I have a hard time saying that, because a lot of times on the like forums and stuff, you'll see, because like we can't join them, so we're always like looking from afar,
Right.
just to see what's going on in everybody's life. You know, it's
Yep.
like, you know, it's tough, because, you know, a lot of times, and again, I hate saying it this way, but there's no other way for me to say it, is it's kind of like the blind leading the blind.
it is 100%.
And it's like, I watched somebody do a very interesting exercise, and I'd love for you to try this at home. Okay. Now, as an example, I would put you on the ground, and then I would step on the chair and try to pull you up on the chair without you helping yourself. It's like it's not impossible, but it's really hard.
Okay.
And then I would put you on the same chair, standing on the chair, and I would pull you down, and it would happen
Right.
like it was basically like, you know, it just topples right over. And so, you know, and the lesson in that video was, it's so easy for people to pull you down, even though you're trying to pull them up.
That is such a spot on metaphor.
And
yes.
and I'd love to use that instead of that other thing of like the blind leading the blind or misery loves company, because those are both so negative. It's like there's a positive word in the comparison, right?
Yeah.
So that is something that I've been like showing patients, and it's like, it matters who you surround yourself with, right?
Yes.
And like, thank goodness you had such a great partner through all of this,
Yes.
that was always trying to pull you up,
Yes.
right? And then you finally got to a point where you could help them,
Yeah.
you know, and then help yourself. And so that's just a piece that I felt like I had to touch on, because when you're in that pit of misery, when you're at the low point, like you can't see out of that hole at all.
No, it's true. You're so right. So one day we had left your office. It was one of the days Craig came with me. I think we were in this office actually, and we were talking about my sleep, and you had said, like, are you done Googling? Are you done? Because I don't know if you remember, but I was in a Facebook group for like 3PD, for like vestibular migraine, occipital neuralgia, neuropathy, POTS, dysautonomia. Like, if it existed, I was like in a group for it. And I wasn't there trying to be negative.
Right.
I was just trying to
find answers, solve problems, right?
But we left one day, and Craig said, why do you even go to those groups? And I said, because I want to find a success story. And Craig looked at me and he goes, you're not going to. Nobody who's recovered hangs out in those groups. Everyone that's there is in panic mode. They're all in the same space that you are. So you're not going to find a success story in there. You need to just leave. And I was like, yeah, but what if there is a success story and I miss it? He's like, there is a success story. Be it. Like, be it. And I'm like, because I don't know if I believe that I deserve it. And, and I went through that whole
Yeah.
spiel with
Yeah,
you too.
yeah.
And
But like
Yeah.
what you just said right there
Yeah.
could be the most powerful message that in this entire hour.
yeah.
And the way he put it, or the way that you just repeated it, is it's like you're not going to find the success stories because they don't hang out there anymore.
It's true.
They want to help, but they also recognize, kind of like that solving thing before,
Yes.
they can't keep doing the same thing over and over because it'll typically get them back there.
Yes. So the
Right.
one thing I did leave all the groups, but the one thing I did is a little over a month ago, I typed a success story and I copy and pasted it into like every single group. And I was like, hey, just so you know, like, you don't have to stay stuck, but you've got to learn to stop fearing and resisting these symptoms. And you've got to be open to the idea that what you're experiencing is due to like a highly dysregulated nervous system. And I was like, I understand that some of you might have actual diseases and illnesses and diagnosis and tissue disorder, tissue damage.
Yep.
And like, I'm not even saying that, but I'm saying if you've gotten all of this clearance from medical doctors and you're still scratching your head and you're still experiencing these debilitating symptoms. So I just felt like I wanted to do that before I like officially left them all.
Right. It's almost like that closure piece,
Yeah.
right? And that a lot comes with that because it's almost like paying homage to all the stuff you've done for the last 40 years and the why, and you like it's like you finally satisfied that purpose, and you're like, here you go.
Yeah.
I know I can't necessarily help every single one of you,
Yeah.
but if you followed this, like, this is all you need to do. Like it's hard. It's simple.
But
But
not
it's
easy.
hard, right?
Yeah.
It's simple to do. It's like it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
But at the same time, getting yourself to a place where you can understand it and then go through with it
Yeah.
and enact it and put it into action is hard,
Yep.
right? And then the physiology that comes from just being in that fight or flight is huge in terms of it's
Absolutely.
just working against you the whole time. So you just got to fight harder,
Yep.
right? But there's easy ways to do that, right? Like in the beginning, we didn't do a whole lot. We said, we're going to park you back in that room. And you're like, I don't even know if I like that room, right? And now you're learning to like it, not even love it yet, but like
Yeah.
we should get a picture of that room, put it in that circle too.
know.
But so many people that go through like this ain't safe for me, they end up falling in love with that room because they're like, I just feel so good when I leave, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about that recovery room. So, but everybody's different.
Yeah,
And that's
and-
the beauty about what we're able to do. We got to figure it out. So it's the puzzle
Yes.
piece. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say the recovery room. That's funny because that was actually a huge piece for me. And I kept telling you, it's the recovery room. There's something in there. It's like, I don't like it. It's doing something bad to me. And you're like, no, it's not. Like, you are just still with your thoughts and your symptoms in that room. And that's why you don't like that room.
Right.
And I was like, it's not why.
Right.
It's the PMF. And you're like, it's actually not, Amy.
It's and like the psychology of every case is involved in every single case, right? I say it
Yeah.
could be the size of a nickel, it could be the size of an elephant.
Yeah.
It just depends, and not everybody recognizes it in the beginning, right? We usually do, and so our attempt to try to have you recognize it yourself, or we like say, hey, have you considered XYZ and how it might have affected your system? And you're like, no, I never have, but it totally makes sense. And that is like easily part of the game.
Yeah.
Just understanding why this crap happened in the first place. And you're like, oh my gosh, like now that I look back, it's so obvious.
Right.
But when you're in the fight, like looking from outside the box, it's like, it's almost impossible to in the box.
Yeah.
So that's where like that's where other coaches, that's where other doctors, they all play their role to like pull you out.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're in a place where we can throw a rope in. You've just got to hold on.
Yeah.
And then we'll just get you to the next level and the next level and the next level. And some are going to be really easy to get to, and some are going to be really hard to get past. But if we do all of the right things, then we're pretty well going to be like a success story every time.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I agree. And looking back, actually, your conversation with me about the recovery room, that was a very pivotal point for me, because that was the last, just kind of when I would come here, I'd be like, yeah, I'm doing good, but not that. And that was still very fear-based. And I was like, yeah, but what if I'm responding weird to XYZ or what? And I was like, okay, you're still trying to problem solve though. And you're still trying to creatively get them to like, you know, allow you to opt out of different things in there and whatnot. And like, you guys aren't going to force me to do it. You're like,
right.
okay, it's your choice.
Yeah.
You know, you're here getting treatment, but you can choose to do that or not. And I realized that when I would go home, my symptoms also would flare if I sat on the couch. And so I found myself, when I was at the worst of it, I would just pace and pace and pace. And that's when I started walking, because I was like, pacing is a fear-based behavior, but walking and just learning.
Like on purpose.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
on purpose, and parasympathetic breathing and just relaxing my body, because you can convince yourself you're safe in your brain, but your body has to match that
Right.
energy. And
And then there's the conscious and the subconscious, right?
Yes.
This is a whole other podcast, right? But
yes, I could do a part 2 now.
Totally, right? And it's like, you're like, okay, I just need to get out of this environment,
Yeah.
right? And so you just go outside, do the same thing. It's just pacing in a line.
Yeah.
You know, but it totally changes your body's response to the thing that you did that was a habit.
Yep, because it's not a fear loop now.
Right.
It's a conscious choice.
Yep.
And so when I was first walking, you guys remember I was wearing those terrible Crocs because I
Totally.
couldn't tie my shoes.
Totally.
They were so bad.
Yeah.
And I had like jello arms, jello legs. My legs would give out on me. So initially I would just try to walk to the mailbox and back. And then it was like 1,000 steps and then 2,000 steps. And now I'm like 15, 20,000 steps a day, and I'm hiking in the mountains. And, you know, it's so funny. When I first came here and you told me how long your program was, and I was like, I'm going to have to stretch it out a little, because what if I leave here in 5 months and I still am experiencing symptoms? That was my biggest fear when I first started, was that when my time was up, so to speak, I would still have symptoms. And I actually do still have symptoms, but they're massively improved, and they're continuing to improve, and I know they will continue to improve. But it's so funny because my perspective has shifted so much, because it was so fear-based and so symptom resistant in the beginning. And now I'm at the point where like, I don't know what better way to put it than I just was over my own shit at a certain point in time.
Totally.
Like, I was just like, I'm over my own shit. Like,
Totally.
I'm missing out on things. And like, yes, I would like to feel optimal while I do X, Y, Z, but feeling optimal should not be my only qualifying factor
Right.
to living my life.
Well, and it's like very black and white too, right? When you feel like that in the beginning, I mean, I just had somebody the other day like crying in front of me, like, I just want to feel better.
Yeah.
Totally. I completely understand. We've got hundreds of people that said the exact same thing, but there's a process to feeling better.
There is.
Right? One piece is the mindset. The other is understand what the trauma does. The other piece is make sure we just like don't eat shitty foods, right? And then it's like we have to then recondition your system so that it can do the things that it used to could, but do it in a way that the behavior is different, that doesn't drive the same problem again.
Yeah.
Right? Like kind of in a nutshell, that's what it
Yes.
is. But there's a process to, like, it took you 6 weeks to kind of hit the point where you're like, okay, I'm ready to make a choice.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's like, okay, well, it's not a fear thing. I just want to make sure that I'm like just not going to overdo it. So then you start to do things on purpose. So like you don't overdo it. You pace it better so that you don't gas yourself out, right? And so then
Yeah.
you start, there's a point where you're like reacting to everything. And then there's another point where you start like listening, like have the ability to listen and then process what we've been saying this whole time, which is why we just keep repeating and repeating and repeating until that aha moment happens. All right, great. We got you. Let's go.
Yeah.
And then it's like off to the races. That's why the program can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months in the beginning for certain cases. Some are longer, depends on what's going on. Like if there's trauma everywhere, then it's like, okay, we gotta take time to deal with that stuff too. And we usually refer that part out. But 3 to 6 months is a very reasonable time frame to rehab this stuff, as long as we cover all of our bases.
Yeah. And, initially I talked about therapy, and I appreciated that you were like, Amy, I don't think you need to go unpack your stuff in therapy right now. Like, we need to get you down here. And I'm so glad I didn't push that issue, because at first I was like, I don't think he's right. And then after about a month, I was like, yeah, I'm in no shape to go sit in
like you can't even get from this room to the next room, let alone open up Pandora's box.
100%.
Right? You're like,
yes.
the topic even comes up and you just turn into a ball of tears, right? So it's like, and that's the thing, is like, we've actually had therapists and trauma therapists that come in here as a patient, and they're actively working on all their trauma while we're trying to get them better. And I'm like, you can't, but you're flaring yourself. You can't do that. You're inhibiting the growth capability now. When we plateau, that's when it's time to really do the trauma work, right? And
some of it you might find doesn't really even exist once. Not all of it. Yeah. But I think that
it's more like the behavior patterns and the thought patterns, as opposed to like the trauma. The trauma exists. It's the things that people can create, or the reasoning why. Yes. That it's like, sometimes you just flip that and you're like, oh, well, that's easy. Yeah. Like, why was I ever thinking that? You know? And it's a very interesting and fun road to navigate, because everybody's different. So for us on the practitioner side, how can we say this or explain this or help them understand that all they have to do is X, Y, or Z for this piece, while the other side, it's like, let's not even go there. Like, I'm not even going to ask about it for the next 2 months. Right. And then when you start asking me, that's when it's time. Yep. Right. And you're like, okay, I'm like jonesing at the bit to like go do this. Am I ready? And it's like, well, do you think you are? You're like, absolutely. Cool. Yeah. Go call, make that appointment. Yep. Right. And so that's the fun part.
And some of the things that I thought that I needed to bring to therapy, I really don't think I need to, or at least not in that same context. Yeah.
Well, like a lot of people, and you probably would have done this, is you would have shown up to therapy to like show your therapist how much you knew. Yeah. Right. And
I've definitely done that.
Oh yeah, totally. But it's like that. You look back at all the stuff that got you here, like to the point of calling us, is not the stuff you need moving forward, right? Because it'll just keep repeating and repeating and repeating. That's why so much of I think our success stories remain success stories, is because we do touch on that human behavior aspect of, you got to change your ways just a little bit, or else the same thing's going to happen again, because you're just going to jump right back into that same deep end. And you're just going to sink like a rock, because you have the same habits. So we have to tweak those just a little bit, that are to create, I say, more conducive to healing types of patterns, right? Yeah. And so I think that's real important in the healing process, not just like doing the cool neurology stuff.
No, I agree.
It's a piece of the puzzle, but there's more to that puzzle.
It's been a huge growth opportunity for me. And I would hear people say things like that when I was in the thick of it, and looking for other content creators and individuals online with lived experience going through stuff like this. And I started looking for success stories at that point in time, instead of like the spiral. And they would say things like that. And I was like, y'all are crazy. You're just saying that because you forgot how bad it was. But I really do agree, because it can be so transformative as far as finding just the practices that are not sustainable or healthy, and seeing, it's kind of like the way I approach our nonprofit work, like looking for gaps in service, but it's like gaps in service to myself. And I tend to see the areas that I go overboard for other people are generally
the ones that you need,
the ones that I need. Yeah. To kind of come full circle with it, with the control piece that I felt like I was lacking so much in the beginning. I actually found that I do have that control on this recovery journey, but it's just not behind the doors that I was looking. It's in the realm of my response and learning to let go of fear and, emotional regulation. And you can't learn. I saw a quote one time, and it said, you can't regulate an emotion that you're constantly repressing. And so there is a way you can regain a sense of control.
Yeah. But the other thing that you said, it was just a couple weeks ago, you said, I think it was joy and like fear can't exist in the same plane.
Yes, we were talking about that.
So like that's why gratitude can be so powerful, because it literally turns off like the fear.
Yes.
Like that, it can completely turn off that sympathetic system.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it's like the two, right? It's the devil and the angel on the shoulder, right? Like which one are you going to let run the show?
Yes. When that reminds me, when I was really at the worst of it, I would read these articles and these books, and people would be like, you need to do something that feels joyful to you. And I could honestly say I could not think of one single thing. And so I changed that motto for myself to, instead of what can I do that would bring me joy right now? Sounds a little cynical, but it worked to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, what can I do that would suck the least right now?
Right.
And
so it's like, you know, inverse
Yes.
of crappy situation. Like what's the
Yes.
least crappy? Okay, cool. Let's go with that.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, so that's like way better than that.
Yes.
Sweet. And so it just like, it gets the foot in the door.
Yep.
Right. So, well,
Yep.
I appreciate you. We do have to wrap up because we got to
Yeah.
actually see some patients here. But
right.
that was like an hour 15, and I know
All
we
right.
could have done another hour 15.
Yeah,
easy.
probably.
You know, in like a month or two, if you want to come back on here and just tell us more about your journey and things
Okay.
like that, we would love to hear it, and I'm sure everybody else would too.
Awesome.
But thank you so much for sharing, you know, all about your journey, what got you here, some of the revelations you had, some of the things that we discussed, some of the things we did. Like we didn't even really touch on the neuro aspect of stuff, but it's like we were doing it anyway. And so it's just that strengthening piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is, as a brain region turns on, all of a sudden these things then happen, right? And so like they all play hand in hand, but I'm just so, so grateful that you have been able to turn the corner and turn into, or start turning back into the person that you know you can be, but also looking at how relaxed you are in the process, knowing that like you don't have to be in full control.
Yes.
It's just, you know, most people describe the way they used to be in the very beginning,
Right.
right before shit hit the fan.
Right.
And that's what they're trying to get back to. But I'm like, you don't want to hit that.
No, that's what got me here.
Exactly. So like, just like, and we've talked about the 80% rule. It's like, if we can get 80% there,
Yeah.
you're still going to be firing 100%,
Yeah.
because that was like 120 to 150 all the time. So like,
Yep.
let's like tone it down a bit. Let's not burn this car up. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I appreciate you sharing everything that you did. And it wouldn't surprise me if you have people like trying to find you by, you know, by watching or listening to this episode. So, don't worry, we'll create some barriers, right? Boundaries. And, you know, if you guys have any questions on how we did what we did, give the office a call. We do free consults. We walk people through stuff. And then if we think we can help, we certainly go through the process of the evaluation and we engage in a program.
Yes.
But,
very non-intimidating process. Even the rough state that I was in, that's the understatement of the century. When I first came in, I didn't feel triggered or anxious, or it was a comforting environment.
Yeah, it's always unique when somebody who's so reactive keeps coming back to us to tell us how reactive they are, but like they're asking for help too, you know? So like we've developed like a ton of patients, CE, but also TS, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the CE patients, because we know what people are going through.
Right.
So we just have to like, sometimes we have to just wear it. And it's like, okay, are you done yet? Okay, cool. Now let's go do this. And you're like, okay, fine. Like I don't have any energy to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So let's go do something else. And you know, that's where everything starts to change. So,
Yeah.
so thank you again so much for sharing everything. I am so happy for you. You know, if we could do this like a nonprofit and just do it for everybody, it would be an amazing thing. But,
I'm a grant writer.
well, looks like we might have our next situation in front of us, right? But you know, that's a goal of mine, is to create something like that so that people who cannot afford stuff like this actually have access. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, we can talk about that later.
All right.
Cool. Thank you
Yeah.
so much again, Amy. You're a natural, by the way. She
Oh,
was
thank
nervous.
you.
Can you believe she was nervous about talking about this? All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Neuro Reset Podcast. Just stay tuned for the next one. We'll see you next time.